Hello, welcome again to One Purpose, Perspective, and Presence, the channel where we get to talk about what it means to be human. My name is Witzeman, and today we are going to talk about the subject of midlife crisis. But before we start, may I ask you to please like and please subscribe to our channel for more videos created just for you. Midlife crisis. It tends to mean so many things to so many people. To other people, of course, it's just a myth. It's just something that we tend to thumbsuck and create into a big issue, maybe that it is not. Maybe it's true. Maybe there's nothing really called a midlife crisis. Because to start with, rather, to declare anything to be a midlife crisis, you will have to know where the middle of your life is. So maybe if you are 20 and experiencing a midlife crisis, then that could be on the expectation that your life is going to end at 40. Because the middle is the middle, between the beginning and the end of something. So then maybe for people who have a midlife crisis at 50, that would mean they're expecting to live for 100 years. However, it's neither here or there, because at the same time, there's another concept that we call, or rather a phrase that we tend to use very often, where we say life begins at 40. So, which means for someone whose life begins at 40, their midlife crisis will be somewhere later on. Anyway, maybe I'm diverging. But the main point about our topic today, midlife crisis, is that in as far as we have come to define it, and of course it's defined differently by different people, but it is essentially a period in our lives when we tend to be grappling with things that we don't seem to have answers for. Situations that we don't seem to have the right way of going through them. And so because of that, they tend to be troubling and they change our lives in one way or another, in a way that we could regard as a crisis. But I have my own view on the subject of midlife crisis. And that view is informed mostly by my own life. In my life, a midlife crisis is a time in one's life, and it doesn't have to come in the middle of our lives, but it is a time in one's life where we get to question certain things about our lives. Okay? Let me put it into perspective. Imagine ever since, a child is born, they spend a few months with the mother, who, if she's supposed to go back to work, then she goes to work after about 4 months, depending on where we are, the country we're in. And so when the mother goes back to work after those few months, the child then gets to have someone else taking care of them, or maybe even that's why early schooling begins for many. And now through school, it's a matter of, keep passing so you can get to the next standard. And then we do that. We study as hard as we can, and then we pass, we go to the next standard, just like that. or the next grade, and we get encouraged that way from one stage to another. Do this, work hard, you'll get to what you want, and we do that. At home, maybe they are, mom and dad are Muslims or Christians or Hindu, any of the religions. And yes, we also grow up in that environment, and it's like we adopt that religion by default. Everything else that's done at home, we are part of it, and then it becomes part of our life, the way we live, the way we grow up, our upbringing as such. We get to finish high school, and then you go to university. We have adults around us, the loving mom and dad, or relatives, all our loved ones, encouraging us to take maybe this career or this qualification over that other one, and things like that. So, out of all those advices, we then end up making a decision to register in engineering or in political science, this or that. And so we go into university, and then the same happens. We make decisions, we end up, achieving certain things out of the decisions we make. But now the important thing about the decisions that we make from when we are born until when we get to a certain stage in our lives, especially a time when we regard ourselves as adults, much of the decisions that are taken are not really something that an individual in themselves, tend to go deep and think, search within themselves, what is it that is more interesting that they want to do or something like that. But they're mostly decisions that we take based on the loving people around us, the adults, especially mom and dad or the guardian, in terms of what they encourage us to do. And yes, I think they tend to do their best to encourage us in one way or another because, number one, they have our best interest at heart. They try their best to help us achieve our happiness, what would make us happy, and, such things. So they guide us in the way that they think would make us happy, and we subscribe to that because we trust them with that, and so we go along. Somewhere in life, when we are growing up, under a certain environment, with a certain upbringing and certain beliefs and all those things, there's always this moment in our adulthood, and it doesn't matter where we then get to ask ourselves the key question: are we happy? And we ask ourselves that question because happiness is the pursuit of life. Happiness is the reason why we ever do anything. It's the purpose why we live. Because everything that we do is done with the expectation of happiness after doing it. In other words, doing is a condition that we set between us and our happiness. Here I am, I want a certain kind of happiness, and for me, the condition for me to achieve that happiness is to do this, to go there, to speak to this person, and all that. So, happiness is the purpose of our lives. So, when we get to a point in our lives when we get to ask ourselves a question as to, am I happy? It's essentially me asking myself whether up to so far in my life, I am living up to the purpose of my life. And when one asks themselves that question, normally it's because, they've got all the honesty and the sincerity of approaching that question, so that whatever answer comes to the questions they ask, they would be willing to take responsibility of that, and then go about to correct the situation if it needs correction, or to own up to those things. If we are happy, to own up to those things that make us happy and continue doing more of them so that we continue to get more of that happiness. But we ask ourselves because we want to align ourselves with our purpose of life, the purpose of happiness. Now, when you ask that question of are we happy, the answer may come in one of different ways. Rather, one of two ways. In one that says, yes, we are happy where we are, or no, we are not happy where we are. We could be happier. If the answer is that we are happy where we are, we look at the whole process that our life has taken from our birth up to where we are, and we look at all the main decisions that were taken by us in collaboration with others in helping us to achieve that happiness. So at some point our parents decided to align to this religion or that religion, and we became part of that. At some point our parents advised us to take up a certain trade or career, and we aligned with that. All those different decisions come together to put us where we are at this point, where we ask ourselves, am I happy or not? It is only when we think we are happy where we are that we would tend to respect the process that brought us to that point. In other words, if we happen to be Christian at that time or Muslim, we would respect that as part of our happiness. If we are a plumber at that time, or an engineer, or an IT specialist, we would respect the decision that made us that IT specialist, for instance, that led us to that happiness. But if the answer is no, if the answer is that we are not happy where we are, we still go back to look at the process that we took that led us to this point where we are, where we regard ourselves as not happy. We look at the decisions taken by others or in conjunction with others, where others encouraged us in this way or another way, whether it was our religion, our beliefs, customs, advices that other people helped us with, and everything. In other words, we're going to look at everything that happened as being the one or the process that led us to where we are, and we look at where we are and you find that we are not happy, and in that case it means we will then conclude that those decisions which led us to where we are have not resulted into our happiness, and therefore we need something else, different conclusions, different decisions and beliefs for us to be able to go to the place where we would be happy. So essentially, midlife crisis is a point in our lives when we challenge all the decisions that led us to where we are. If where we are, we don't regard ourselves as happy, and we challenge them so that from that point where we are, we begin to move forward in a way that would correct whatever mistakes we may have done before that point, which led us to that point where we don't regard ourselves as happy, and then move forward in a way that begins to make us happy. Now, most of the times when we look at someone that we normally refer to as someone going through a midlife crisis, we may see say a 50-year-old man behaving in certain ways that we find to be strange in some way, or rather, not behaving in ways that we think a model 50-year-old needs to behave in. But what is a model 50-year-old? A model 50-year-old is actually a typical 50-year-old. And that depends on perspective. It's basically a perspective. Um, because typical, I mean, there are certain things that we may expect a 50-year-old to be because of our culture or our upbringing or what we've been led to believe that a 50-year-old person needs to be or act like. And that is different from how, for instance, a 50-year-old would actually be in another place, a different place than where we are. So, whatever we may regard as typical is just a perspective of our own individual expectations of what a 50-year-old is. But more especially, the whole thing about typical people or a typical 50-year-old are all based on habits. Now, if we look at many 50-year-olds and realize that maybe they tend to behave in a certain way, and then we take that average way in which they behave as how a 50-year-old needs to be, then we take that average way as the benchmark against which we then measure other 50-year-olds, and then we say they're either complying to being a typical 50-year-old because they are subscribing to that model, or if they seem to be defying that model, then we say they are being not normal, or rather abnormal 50-year-olds. So it's all a matter of perspective. But usually what happens when someone is going through a midlife crisis, we tend to see their behavior change in a way that we were not expecting. You see, let's say before leading to that point, this person used to live this way, and then they got to a certain point where they seem to have made up their minds to change how they used to be into beginning to live a different way. And we look at the different way and we regard it as a crisis. We regard it as them not living up to our expectations of them. And so we start, raising eyebrows and, getting to wonder at their behavior or their appearance and things like that. But essentially, that you see, that is what happens outside of that person in us viewing them. But inside that person, what is happening is that the difference that we are seeing is a result of them having realized or come to a conclusion that they were not happy with how life got to be at that moment, and them taking up the responsibility to change the decisions that led them to where they are, with the expectation that the changed decision will result into changed behavior, and in this case result into the happiness they're expecting. So midlife crisis is just, to me, nothing that big as such, but only a time in someone's life where they tend to question the decisions that led them to where they are. And if those decisions did not result into happiness, for them to then take up responsibility for their happiness by beginning to make new decisions that would lead them to where their happiness is. Now, There are two types of people, I'd say, with regard to the how to deal with the issue of midlife crisis. Um, or rather, I'd say three. Okay. The first one are those people who having to decide to review their lives, and then what they then find at that point is that number one, where they are happy with who they are, and then they go back and look at the decisions that led to where they are, and then they respect those decisions. Now, if the decision, one of them is that you were raised a Muslim at home, you look at that point and you find that being a Muslim makes you happy, is part of the happiness that led you to, the process that led you to where you are happy. You are not likely to change that because now being a Muslim in that case makes you happy. It's part of the things that make you happy. So when we review these decisions and we find that all of them have come together to make us happy where we are, we don't change them. That's why someone who grew up a Muslim or a Christian, continues to be a Christian, continues to be a Muslim, because they define that as part of their happiness. In other words, the parents and all the people who helped you to take that decision, those decisions that you took that led you to where you are happy, you take those decisions to have been correct. On another side, we find someone who gets to that point of reviewing their lives, who then realizes that they are not happy and they need to do something different. Now, that's a person who then gets to go and challenge most of the decisions that led them to where they are, whether their culture, their, everything. And then they challenge those, and then they find those that they need to correct. And then in moving forward, they then take up responsibility to, number one, change those decisions, and number two, to live up to the new decisions that they have made. And it is in living those decisions up that they get to do the necessary change, either in appearance, in behavior, and all other things. Yes, sometimes people can tend to be skeptical and to wonder, hey, but how can someone in your shoes, or maybe a 50-year-old, behave this way, or things like that? But at the end of the day, happiness is an individual thing. It can only be defined in people's minds. And every person defines their own happiness. And if this is how this person has now defined their own happiness, and they're willing to take responsibility for that, or even take a flag in some cases, then so be it. It's someone taking responsibility for their lives. But now in the third case, you get a situation where someone gets to a point in their lives where they have to review it. They go back, they find that, number one, where they are not happy. And they go back and they realize that some of that unhappiness is a result of certain things, that or the religion they are in, or their culture, their beliefs, and things like that. Where now they realize that the very cause of their unhappiness is, or are the beliefs that they hold. So in this case, someone has seen the problem and has seen the cause of the problem. But now, very often you find a situation where the next step of having to take responsibility for our own lives, to, number one, to change the decisions into deciding on the things that would make us happy, as well as now take responsibility to actualize those decisions every day. In other words, if the decision taken means now we have to change our appearance or our behavior, or most especially our beliefs, then we would need to change the beliefs and change the behavior. But now many people, you find that we get to a point where even though we've seen the need to change our beliefs and our behavior, because by doing that we would find happiness, we are not willing to do that because we don't have the courage to face up with the change that will result from our changed decisions. In other words, we know what would make us happy, but we are not willing to do what needs to be done for us to be happy, because to do that, we would have to change in some way. And to change in some way would go against the beliefs of other people who believe that we have to be in a certain way, maybe especially because of your age. People of your age need to be seen in this way. And so when you change it, people will begin to wonder. And now when they wonder, they ask you questions, and you feel that maybe you don't have the answers to the questions that they might ask. So in that case, you look at your need to change as something that's likely to bring a lot of responsibility on you, and you perceive yourself as unable to live up to that responsibility, to answer the questions that are asked. And so, because you want to avoid all those questions from being asked, you then keep yourself from changing. So in other words, you've traveled the road up to this far, and now you review yourself as to whether you are happy or not. You find that you are unhappy, and you know what makes you unhappy, but you're not willing to correct that thing that causes you to be unhappy, because for you to change it, you will have to change in a way that would not please other people. So the social pressure that comes with that is the one that would normally result in many people being in a situation where they are unhappy, knowing what they need to do to be happy, but not being willing to take the responsibility to be happy because of that fear. So we are unhappy, we know what to do, but we are not doing it because it would upset other people. Let me end it here for today. Thank you.